It's been an entire year since our last Star Wars Canon in Chronological Order list, and since then, the Star Wars franchise has grown rather significantly. There have been more novels and comics than I care to count, an entire new season of Star Wars Rebels the TV series, and a brand new movie in the form of Star Wars Rogue One. Which means if you intend to marathon the entire Star Wars franchise in chronological order, you're going to need a new guide. And so, without any further ado, welcome to a guide to Star Wars Canon in chronological order as of May 4th, 2017.
To begin with, you want to get out Star Wars Aliens Volume 1 and read the short story A Recipe for Death, and then immediately put the book away, head down to the comic book store and get ready to read a little bit about Yoda. Entirely skipping the first 25 volumes, you want to get out Star Wars Volume 26 and read Yoda's Secret War Part 1, pages 8 onwards, followed by issue 27 and 28, reading Part 2 and Part 3 in their regular order, 29 for Part 4, but only pages 1 through 15, and then issue 30 for Part 5, reading pages 3 to 9, pages 13 to 14, but only the first panel of 14, page 15, and page 18. And while still sticking to the comics for just a little bit longer, read the comic Darth Maul issues 1 to 3, and likely this is where you'll read the rest of Darth Maul's comics as well, but these are the only ones out as of making this video, so I can't say for certain. Regardless, with the 3 available now read, it's time to turn on your television for Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. However, while watching this, you also need to read the short comic Probe Droid Problem, which is also found within Darth Maul issue 1. As soon as the credits roll on The Phantom Menace, you'll want to get out your comic book collection again and read Anakin and Obi-Wan issue 1, pages 10 to 15, issue 2, 15 to 19, issue 3, 6 to 11, issue 4, 9 to 12, issue 5, 17 onwards, and then back to issue 1 for 1 to 9, and then 16 to 19, issue 2, 1 to 15, and then 20 to 21, issue 3, 1 to 5, 12 to 20, issue 4, 1 to 8, 13 to 20 as well, and then issue 5 for pages 1 to 16. And so with that done, and indeed the entire Obi-Wan and Anakin comic series finished, you'll want to get out the novel Star Wars Aftermath Life Debt, but only to read the prelude and the epilogue. With those now read, it's already time to turn your television back on to watch Star Wars Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. And then back off again to read the prologue of Star Wars A New Dawn, and then immediately back on again, because it's now time to get started on the Clone Wars series. Now, as you no doubt are already aware of, the Clone Wars series was, for some reason, both made and aired completely out of order. And if that didn't make things complicated enough, luckily for us, there's also now other Star Wars canon which is contemporary with the Clone Wars also, so buckle up. Firstly, watch the Clone Wars Season 2 Episode 16, followed by the Clone Wars Season 1 Episode 16, followed by the movie. However, while watching the movie, you also have to read pages 185 to 188 of the Star Wars novel AHSOKA. Then, once that movie's finished, get out Star Wars Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, to read pages 7 to 79, which is chapters 1 to 6, while watching the following Clone Wars episodes. Season 3, Episode 1, Season 3, Episode 3, Season 1, Episode 1 through to Season 1, Episode 15, Season 1, Episode 17 through to Season 1, Episode 21, Season 2, Episode 1 through to Season 2, Episode 3, Season 2, Episode 17 through to Season 2, Episode 19, and then Season 2, Episode 4 through to Season 2, Episode 8. See, I warned you it gets a little bit convoluted, and we're not even done yet. But we are up to the next section of Star Wars Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, reading pages 81 to 133, which is chapters 7 to 11, while watching the Clone Wars Season 2 Episode 9 through to Season 2 Episode 14, reading pages 3 onwards of issues 7, 8, 9, and 10 of the comic book Kanan the Last Padawan, and then reading pages 3 to 13 of issue 11 of Kanan the Last Padawan, before going on to watching the rest of the Clone Wars series, which you watch, as I must remind you, while you're still reading, slowly I suppose, chapters 7 to 11 of the Star Wars novel Catalyst. And so while peering out over the top of that novel, watch the Clone Wars Season 2 Episode 20 to Season 2 Episode 22, Season 3 Episode 5 through to Season 3 Episode 7, Season 3 Episode 2, 4, 8, Season 1 Episode 22, Season 3 Episode 9 to Season 3 Episode 11, Season 2 Episode 15, Season 3 Episode 12 through to Season 3 Episode 22, Season 4 Episode 1 through to 22, Season 5 Episode 2 to 13, Season 5 Episode 1 followed by 14 to 20, and finally Season 6 in an actual regular order, watching Episode 1 to 13. And you're now done with the Clone Wars series. However, not quite yet done with the actual Clone War itself, because now you must once again get out Star Wars Aliens Volume 1 to read the Crimson Corsair and the Lost Treasure of Count Dooku, but only the prologue, and then the entirety of the Star Wars novel Dark Disciple, but then we're once again back to prologues to read the prologue of AHSOKA. And now it's time to once more head back to the comic book store to read Star Wars Darth Maul Son of Dathomir, issues 1 to 4. Which brings us around to Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, which you have to watch while reading the comic book Kanan the Last Padawan issue 1, page 3 onwards, and the entirety of issue 2, while also reading page 11 of the Star Wars novel A New Dawn, and pages 135 to 142, which is chapter 12, of once again Star Wars Catalyst, a Rogue One novel. And so with that, you're done with Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, but still far from done with Star Wars Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, so go on to read chapter 13. And then you're once again back to reading Kanan the Last Padawan for issues 3 and 4, and pages 1 to 19 of issue 5. Follow this by cracking out AHSOKA again to read pages 64 to 68 and 126 to 130. There's no chapters I can give for those two because they're both interludes. Speaking of interludes, also read the interlude found between pages 327 and 332 in Star Wars Aftermath Empire's End. And then back once more again to AHSOKA for pages 296 to 298, which is once more another interlude, before once more picking up Star Wars Catalyst, a Rogue One novel to read pages 151 to 221, which is chapters 14 to 19. And hopefully you didn't stray too far after putting down AHSOKA, because it's time to pick that up once more and read pages 7 to 63, 69 to 125, 131 to 184, 189 to 237, 239 to 243, 245 to 295, and then 299 to the end of the novel, which is essentially the entire novel, excluding the few interludes that we moved up earlier in the chronology, so now you're actually done with AHSOKA, so you can put it back on the shelf or return it back to the library. And while we're on a roll finishing off books, also read pages 223 onwards, which is chapter 20 to the end of the novel, which will also finish off Star Wars Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, allowing you to place it right next to AHSOKA on the shelf. And once you're done doing so, read pages 23 to 33 of the first issue of Dr. Aphra before reading pages 1 to 312 of the Star Wars novel Tarkin. Which is what brings us to one of my rare lapses in research, because this is around about when you should start reading the Star Wars novel Thrawn. Now, I've not actually read it, it only came out on the 11th of April, and though other books that I ordered at the same time have arrived, Thrawn has unfortunately not. So I suppose what I'm saying is, rather than directing your blame towards me, direct it towards the Postal Service. And so with that disclosure fully disclosed, it's time to read Star Wars issue 7 for From the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi, the last of his breed, before turning the television back on to watch the newest installment in the Star Wars saga, which is of course Rogue One, a Star Wars story, but only the opening scene. Once that opening scene is finished, get out Star Wars A New Dawn to read the entire novel, excluding the part that was earlier in this list, and then read pages 1 to 20, which is the prologue, of the Star Wars novel Lost Stars, before reading the entirety of Star Wars Lords of the Sith. And while you're going to put A New Dawn and Lords of the Sith back on the shelf, also read pages 312 to 314 of Tarkin, which will bring you to the end of that novel also. Now crack out Star Wars issue 15 for yet another installment of From the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi, before reading the first chapter of Star Wars Lost Stars, and then heading back to the Star Wars comic book series again for issue 20 to once again read another installment of From the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi. We're now done with that, but not yet done with comics, so read issues 1 to 5 of the comic book series Lando. And now it's time to read Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company Chapter 1. I won't be able to provide page numbers for this one because I actually listened to the audiobook, and I really can't suggest it enough. It is a really fantastically done audiobook, but before I digress too much, read chapters 2 to 6, which is pages 39 to 112 of Star Wars Lost Stars. Which brings us straight to the second TV series, so watch Spark of the Rebellion and then Star Wars Rebels Season 1, Episode 1 and Episode 2. However, because nothing is ever truly easy, and indeed it seems that our lot in life is to suffer, there is published between episodes of Star Wars Rebels a Star Wars Rebel comic book series. So now read Ringwraiths before watching Episode 3, Learning Patience before watching Episode 4, and The Fake Jedi followed by Callus's Hunt before watching Episode 5 and 6. And then it's time to return back to reading Kanan the Last Padawan for issue 1, pages 1 to 2, issue 5, pages 19 to 21, issue 6, but only the epilogue, followed by the prologues of issues 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then both the prologue and the epilogue of issue 11. cap this all off with issue 12 in its entirety read in regular order, and you're now done with Kanan the Last Padawan. Which means it's time to return once more to the game of cat and mouse between Star Wars Rebels the TV show and the Star Wars Rebels comic book. So watch Season 1 Episode 7 of Star Wars Rebels, followed by the comics Return of the Slavers and Eyes on the Prize. And then Season 1 Episode 8, followed by Sabotage Supplies, and then Season 1 Episode 9 and 10, followed by the 3 comics Ezra's Vision, Becoming Hunted, and Assessment, and then on to Season 1 Episode 11 through to 13, then Center Perspective and Ocean Rescue, before taking a brief pause from the cat and mouse game to read Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company Chapter 7. Once you're done with that, you're right back into it for the second season of Star Wars Rebels, so begin by watching Star Wars Rebels Season 2 Episode 1 through to Season 2 Episode 4, then reading the comic Secrets of Sienna, and then back to the show for Episodes 5 to 7, before reading No Sympathy, watching Episodes 8 and 9, reading A Day's Duty, watching Episode 10, reading Icebreaker, and then watching the rest of Season 2 Episode 11 to 22, and then watching the entirety of Star Wars Rebels Season 3, Episodes 1 through 22. Now, we've once again come up to a bit of a brief disclaimer. You see, there are apparently more Star Wars Rebels comics that go throughout Season 2 and Season 3 that I've not listed here. The only issue is I've not been able to find them to buy or even read online, and apparently at some point they stopped being made in English, and quite a few of them are only available in German. I did try to find some of them, but I wasn't able to find a single image of many of them, or even an image of the issue of the magazine that they're supposedly published in. So while they are supposedly technically canon, I'm going to leave them off the list for now, because if you can't actually find them to read them, it's kind of a moot point. So with that done and said, let's quickly move on. We're once again done with comic books for a little while, so read Chapter 7 of Lost Stars, Chapter 21 of Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company, and pages 145 to partway through page 149 of Star Wars Lost Stars. It's the first part of Chapter 8. And now finally we're up to a point where you can click play in the movie you paused such a long time ago, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. However, as soon as those credits roll, it's time for the one that started it all, Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. But while you're watching that film, you also have to read pages 149 to 177 of Lost Stars, and also Chapter 32 of Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company. And once you're done with all of that, we're once again back to reading comics. So firstly, start off with issue 1 to 5 of Princess Leia, then issues 1 to 5 of Chewbacca, and finally issues 1 to 5 of Han Solo. Now read all of Smuggler's Run, a Han Solo and Chewbacca adventure, excluding the epilogue and prologue. Then, before you put those reading glasses away, read chapters 10 and 11 of Lost Stars, chapters 1 to 13 of The Weapon of a Jedi, the entirety of Heir to the Jedi, and then back again to Lost Stars for chapters 12 to 14. Which brings us back again to the comics for a bit of a back and forth between the Star Wars comic series and the Darth Vader comic series. So read issues 1 to 3 of Star Wars, followed by issue 1 of Darth Vader, followed by issue 4 of Star Wars, issue 2 to 4 of Darth Vader, issue 5 of Star Wars followed by issue 5 of Darth Vader, and then both issue 6 of Star Wars and Darth Vader at the same time, because they're concurrent, followed by the epilogue from the Journal of Old Ben Kenobi, the last of his breed, found in Star Wars issue 7, and then issues 8 through 12 of Star Wars for Showdown on Smuggler's Moon, followed by issues 7 to 12 of Darth Vader for Shadows and Secrets, and now to make things ever more confusing, we're up to the 6-part comic book series Vader Down, which is, of course, spread out over 3 different ongoing comic book series. So firstly for part 1, read the standalone self-titled comic, Vader Down. Then move over to Darth Vader issue 13 for part 2, issue 13 of Star Wars for part 3, issue 14 of Darth Vader for part 4, Star Wars issue 14 for part 5, and then Darth Vader issue 15 for the final part 6. They really don't like to make this easy for me, do they? But luckily the next few series are considerably less complicated, so read issues 16 to 19 of Star Wars for Rebel Jail, and then issues 16 to 20 of Darth Vader for the Shu-Torun War, followed once more by issue 20 for the Misadventures of 000 and BT, and then issue 21 through to 25 for the End of Game series. And then leaving the Darth Vader comic to return once again to the Star Wars comic, we have Book 5, which is the series The Last Flight of the Harbinger, which itself is a little bit chronologically convoluted. So firstly read issue 21 for part 1, then issue 23, but only pages 4 to 6, issue 22, but only pages 1 to 13, issue 23, but only pages 1 to 3, issue 22 again from page 14 to the end of the novel, issue 23 again from page 7 to the end of the novel, and then issue 24 and 25 for part 4 and 5 read in their regular order. This brings us back around to Yoda's Secret War, which we haven't seen since pretty much the beginning of this chronology, so begin by reading pages 1 to 8 of issue 26 of Star Wars, then page 16 onwards of issue 29, and then from issue 30 read pages 1 to 2, and then pages 10 to 12, page 14 but only the second panel onwards, page 16 to 17, and then page 19, which means you're now done with Yoda's Secret War. However, we're once more immediately greeted by yet another comic from earlier in the chronology, so we're back to reading Dr. Aphra issue 1, pages 1 to 21, issue 2, page 2 onwards, and then issue 3, 4, 5, and 6 in their regular order. Which means we're once again done with comics for just a little while, so read Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company chapter 2 to 6, and then chapters 8 to 13. Which finally brings us to another movie, so turn on your television and stick in the VHS because it's time to watch Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. However, hopefully you're a fast reader and you're good at multitasking because the period during Empire Strikes Back is perhaps one of the most canonically crowded part of the chronology, so while watching the film read pages 283 to 348 of the Star Wars novel Lost Stars, while also reading chapters 14 to 20, 22 to 31, and 33 to 43 of Star Wars Battlefront Twilight Company. And now with that movie finished, very briefly turn off your television, read the prelude to Star Wars Aftermath Empire's End, and pages 349 to 447, which is partway through chapter 19 through to the end of chapter 24 of Star Wars Lost Stars. And the reason I said only turn off your television briefly is because it's already time for Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. However, as always, there's also some reading to do, so while you're watching the film, read pages 447 to 473 of Lost Stars, chapters 1 to 23 of Moving Target A Princess Leia Adventure, which is the entire novel excluding the prologue and the epilogue, and also read the first 11 pages of the first issue of the comic Star Wars Shattered Empire. And with all of that watched and read, immediately start reading the prelude to Star Wars Aftermath, which happens so soon after Return of the Jedi that it might as well be in the credits. After that, return back to the comic Star Wars Shattered Empire issue 1 to read pages 12 onwards, and then back again to Lost Stars to read pages 473 to 479, which is the last section of chapter 25. And now finish off Shattered Empire reading issues 2, 3, and 4 before returning once again to Lost Stars, but only pages 481 to 485, stopping when the story switches to Thane, and then reading pages 13 to 366 of Star Wars Aftermath, which is the entire novel excluding the prologue. But while you're now done with Star Wars Aftermath, you're not done with the Aftermath trilogy, so get out Star Wars Aftermath Life Debt and read pages 11 to 426, which is chapters 1 to 41. Which means, by the way, you're also now done with Star Wars Aftermath Life Debt, so feel free to put it on the shelf right next to Star Wars Aftermath. But what you're still not quite yet done with is Star Wars Lost Stars, so go on to read pages 485 to 492. And then we're getting very close to finishing the Aftermath trilogy, because now you have to read Empire's End pages 11 to 260, which is chapters 1 to 24. And then, once more, return back to Star Wars Lost Stars to read pages 492 to 499. Which brings us now to the Battle of Jakku. You know, that little skirmish that ended up finally finishing off the Empire and giving Rey her totally sweet AT-AT house. So for the Battle of Jakku, read Star Wars Aftermath Empire's End, pages 261 to 271, which is chapter 25, and Star Wars Lost Stars, pages 501 to 535, which is chapter 27 to chapter 28. With the dust settled on that engagement, read chapters 26 through to 37 of Star Wars Aftermath Empire's End, and then chapter 29 of Lost Stars, which will bring you to the end of the novel, so you can now put that one up on the shelf also. And while you're there, you might as well read chapter 38 and the epilogue of Star Wars Aftermath Empire's End, finishing that novel too. And then we're back once more to reading comics, reading some of Poe Dameron. So read pages 6 to 9 of issue 8, and then page 16 of issue 8, followed by pages 6 to 9 of issue 9, and then pages 15 to 16 of issue 9, followed by pages 6 to 11 of issue 10. And then to a completely different comic, read the standalone C-3PO The Phantom Limb, before returning once more to something we've not seen in a while, reading Star Wars Aliens Volume 1, The Crimson Corsair and the Lost Treasure of Count Dooku. Follow this with the short story Scorched, which you can find as an extra story in the novel Bloodline, which is what you read next. And then back again to Star Wars Aliens Volume 1 for High Noon on Jakku, followed by the epilogue and prologue of The Weapon of a Jedi, and the epilogue and prologue of Moving Target. Not quite yet done with epilogues and prologues, I just had to take a breath. Also read the epilogue and prologue of Smuggler's Run, A Han Solo and Chewbacca Adventure. Then read the short stories True Love, All Creatures Great and Small, and The Face of Evil, all found within Star Wars Aliens Volume 1. There's not really much indication of where any of these stories fall, so placing them here is pretty much because they just have to sit somewhere, and until there's something that better indicates where they should go, here they might as well sit. However, returning back to the more informed placements, read Star Wars Before the Awakening, and then Poe Dameron Issue 1 pages 8 to 11, Issue 2 pages 5 to 7, Issue 1 again pages 1 to 7 and 12 onwards, Issue 2 again pages 1 to 4 and 8 onwards, and Issue 3 in its regular order. But we're far from done with the Poe Dameron comic series, and indeed far from done with their convoluted order, so start reading Issue 4 pages 3 to 17, which then meets up with page 1 and 2 because the story's in medias res format, and then page 18 onwards. And then read Issue 5 to 7 in its regular order, and then pages 1 to 5, 10 to 15, and 17 onwards of Issue 8. Which brings us to Issue 9, which is laid out in a very similar fashion, so read pages 1 to 5, 10 to 14, and then 17 onwards of that. Followed by Issue 10, which has a slightly different pattern, so read pages 1 to 5 and then 12 onwards of that, and then read Issue 11 through to 13 in its regular order. Which, ladies and gentlemen, leads us straight to Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And, well, when you're done with that, I suppose you just join me, and I'd assume every single other Star Wars fan, eagerly awaiting the release of Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi.
Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If there's any material that you think I left off this list or placed in the wrong order, let me know in the comments and I'll consider it when I make the next one of these videos. Although, do keep in mind that this is a list of what's available at the moment, so if the material came out after May 4th, or in fact the 28th of April, which is when I finished this list, it's obviously not going to be in this video. And with all of that said and done, thanks for watching, and until next time, I have been and still am Grim and Grindle. If you want more Star Wars content, we're going to keep doing it throughout the month of May, so subscribe to channel Grim and Grin for more of that.